There are people who walk into a room and immediately take control. They speak loudly, they move quickly, they demand attention, and then there are people like him. He never raised his voice, not once, not in anger, not in urgency, not even when everyone else was speaking over each other. And yet, when he spoke, everyone listened. At first, no one really noticed him. He wasn't the kind of person who stood out. He didn't dress in a way that attracted attention. He didn't interrupt conversations. He didn't try to prove anything. In fact, if you entered the office for the first time, you might not even remember seeing him. He sat near the window, always the same desk, always the same quiet posture. A cup of coffee beside him, a notebook, and a calm presence that didn't ask for anything. His name was Daniel. Daniel had been working in the company longer than most people, but you wouldn't know it from the way he behaved. He didn't talk about his experience. He didn't mention his past achievements. He didn't remind people of his value. He simply did his work, carefully, consistently, without noise. In a place where people often competed to be heard, Daniel chose silence, not because he was afraid, but because he understood something that most people didn't, that not every moment needs a voice, and not every thought needs to be spoken. There was a team meeting every Monday morning. It was always the same. People would gather around the table, laptops open, voices already rising before the meeting even began, ideas thrown around quickly, opinions shared without pause, interruptions, disagreements. Everyone wanted to be right. Daniel sat in the same seat, near the end of the table. He listened. He didn't rush to speak. He didn't react immediately. He observed, not just the words, but the tone, the energy, the small details others ignored. Who was nervous? Who was trying too hard? Who wasn't being heard? He noticed everything. And then, when the room became too full, too noisy, too scattered, he would speak, just once, and calmly, clearly, and suddenly, everything changed. People stopped talking, not because he asked them to, but because something in his voice made them want to listen. He didn't speak loudly, but every word felt intentional. There were no unnecessary sentences, no wasted energy, just clarity. And somehow, in just a few sentences, he would bring the entire conversation back into focus. "This is what we're trying to solve," he would say, or "maybe we're looking at the wrong problem." And suddenly, everyone would pause, because deep down, they knew he was right. At first, people didn't understand it. How could someone so quiet have so much influence? How could someone who spoke the least be heard the most? There was a new employee once. Her name was Lena. She was confident, smart, full of ideas. She spoke often in meetings, and at first, she found Daniel frustrating. "Why doesn't he say anything?" she asked one day. "He just sits there. It's like he's not even trying." Someone smiled. "Just wait," they said. "You'll understand." Lena didn't believe it. She thought influence came from visibility, from speaking up, from being active. And in many ways, she wasn't wrong. But she hadn't yet learned the other kind of power, and the quiet kind. A few weeks later, there was a problem, a serious one. A project that had been running for months was suddenly failing. Deadlines were at risk, clients were unhappy, and the pressure was building. The meeting that morning was different. More tension, more urgency. Voices were louder. People were defending themselves, explaining, arguing, trying to avoid blame. Lena spoke several times. She had ideas, solutions, But the more people spoke, the more confusing everything became. No one was really listening anymore. They were just waiting for their turn to speak. Daniel sat quietly, just like always, listening, watching. Lena noticed him. For the first time, she felt annoyed. Why isn't he helping? She thought. Why is he just sitting there? The room grew louder, more chaotic, until finally, someone said, "We're running out of time." And that was the moment. Daniel leaned forward slightly, not dramatically, just enough to signal presence. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't interrupt. He simply spoke. "We're solving 3 different problems," he said calmly. The room went quiet, not instantly, but gradually, like waves slowing down. People turned toward him. He continued. "The deadline problem, the communication problem, and the expectation problem." He paused, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew the silence mattered. If we don't separate them, we won't solve any of them. No long explanation, no complicated language, just clarity. And suddenly, everything made sense. Lena felt it. That shift, that moment when confusion turns into understanding. And it came from the quietest person in the room. The meeting changed direction after that. People became calmer, more focused. And for the first time that day, progress was made. After the meeting, Lena walked up to Daniel. "I didn't see it before," she said honestly. He looked at her, waiting. "You don't speak much, but when you do, it changes everything." Daniel smiled slightly, not proud, not surprised, just calm. "You don't need many words," he said, "just the right ones." Lena nodded, and in that moment, she understood something new. That power is not always loud. That influence does not require force. And that sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the quietest one, because it listens first and speaks only when it truly matters. After that meeting, something changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but quietly, the way most real changes happen. Lena began to notice Daniel more, not just when he spoke, but when he didn't, which was most of the time. At first, she thought silence meant hesitation, or maybe uncertainty. But now, she started to see it differently. His silence wasn't empty. It was full of attention, full of awareness, full of understanding. One afternoon, Lena found herself sitting across from him in the break room. It was unusually quiet. No one else was there. Just the soft sound of a coffee machine and the distant hum of the office. She hesitated for a moment, then finally asked, "How do you do that?" Daniel looked up. "Do what?" he said gently. "That thing," Lena continued, "in meetings. You don't speak much, but when you do, everyone listens." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He took a small sip of his coffee. And for a moment, it seemed like he might not answer at all. But Lena didn't feel ignored. She felt considered. "I listen," he said finally. Lena smiled slightly. "I think everyone listens," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No," he replied softly. "Most people wait." "Wait?" Lena asked. "They wait for their turn to speak," he said. "They hear words, but they don't really listen." Lena paused because she recognized that in herself. "So what's the difference?" she asked. Daniel leaned back slightly. "The difference," he said, "is that listening is not about you. It's about the other person." Lena frowned slightly, trying to understand. "When you listen," he continued, "you're not preparing your answer. You're not judging. You're not trying to be right. You're just There, fully, Lena looked down at her hands because she realized how rarely she did that. Even in conversations, she was often thinking ahead, planning what to say, trying to sound smart, trying to be useful, trying to be heard. And when you do that, Daniel said, people feel it. They feel whether you are present or not. And when you finally speak, your words carry weight, not because they are louder, but because they come from attention, from understanding, from silence. Lena didn't speak for a while after that, not because she had nothing to say, but because, for the first time, she didn't feel the need to. That evening, as she sat at her desk, she replayed the conversation in her mind. I listened. It sounded so simple, almost too simple, but she knew it wasn't easy. The next day, she decided to try. Another meeting, another discussion, another room full of voices. And this time, Lena said nothing. At first, it felt uncomfortable. She had ideas, thoughts, opinions. She wanted to speak, to contribute, to prove she belonged. But she remembered Daniel's words. Listening is not about you. So she stayed quiet, and instead, she observed. She noticed how often people interrupted each other, how quickly they reacted, how rarely they paused. She noticed the tension, the small frustrations, the things people didn't say. And slowly, something interesting happened. She began to understand more, not just the topic, but the people, what they cared about, what they were afraid of, what they needed. It was like seeing beneath the surface. And when the moment came, she spoke. Not early, not often, just once. I think we're all trying to solve this too quickly, she said. Her voice was calm, not forced, not rushed. We haven't fully understood the problem yet. The room paused, and Lena felt it. That same shift, that same quiet attention. She had seen with Daniel. No one interrupted. No one spoke over her. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to fight to be heard. After the meeting, she didn't feel proud. She felt calm, grounded, and strangely, more confident. Not because she spoke more, but because she didn't need to. Days passed, then weeks, and something continued to change, not just in Lena, but in the way people responded to her. They listened more, not always, but enough to notice. And she understood now what Daniel had meant, that true presence cannot be forced. It cannot be performed. It must be real. One evening, as the office slowly emptied, Lena walked past Daniel's desk. He was still there, as usual, calm, focused. She stopped. Do you ever feel like speaking more? She asked. And Daniel looked up. Sometimes, he said. So why don't you? Lena asked. Daniel smiled slightly. Because not everything needs to be said, he replied, and not every moment needs my voice. Lena nodded. But how do you know when to speak? She asked. Daniel thought for a moment, then said, when it helps. Helps what? Lena asked. The situation, he said, not my ego. Lena laughed softly, because that was the hardest part, letting go of the need to be seen, to be heard, to be important, and replacing it with something quieter, something deeper, like the desire to understand, to contribute, to bring clarity, even if no one noticed. And maybe that was the real power, not in being the loudest, not in controlling the room, but in knowing that you don't need to, that your value is not measured by how much you speak, but by the meaning of what you choose to say. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can offer is not a voice, but a moment of silence that allows everything else to finally be heard. There are moments in life when everything becomes louder, not just around you, but inside you. Deadlines, expectations, pressure, the feeling that you need to act quickly, decide quickly, respond quickly. And in those moments, silence feels impossible. A few months later, that kind of moment arrived. The company was going through a major change. A new director had joined, new goals, new expectations. Everything was moving faster. Meetings became longer, emails became more urgent, and slowly, the calm rhythm that once existed began to disappear. People spoke more, not because they had more to say, but because they were afraid of not being heard. Lena felt it too. That pressure, all that subtle fear. If I don't speak, will I be forgotten? She tried to hold on to what she had learned, to listen, to stay present, but it wasn't easy anymore. Because now, everyone was louder, even Daniel, not in the way others were. He still didn't raise his voice, but Lena noticed something different. He spoke more often, still calm, still precise, but more present in discussions. And yet, he was still the same, centered, grounded, unshaken. One afternoon, an important presentation was scheduled, a project that could define the future of the team. Everyone was nervous, and Lena included. She had worked hard on it, prepared carefully, but the room felt heavy. The new director sat at the head of the table, silent, watching. The presentation began. Slides moved, words filled the air, and slowly, things started to go wrong. Questions came early, interruptions, doubts. The structure began to break. Lena felt her heart beating faster. Her thoughts became scattered. She tried to respond, to explain, but the more she spoke, the less clear everything became. The room grew tense, and in that moment, she felt it again. And that pressure to speak more, to fix everything with words, to push harder. But something stopped her, a memory. You don't need many words, just the right ones. She paused just for a second, but it was enough. She looked across the table, at Daniel. He wasn't speaking, not yet. He was watching, listening, just like before. And somehow, that gave her space. Instead of rushing to respond, she took a breath and said nothing. The room continued, voices rising, questions overlapping. And then Daniel spoke. We're trying to defend the solution, he said calmly, but maybe we should explain the problem again. Silence, not forced, natural, because his words made sense. Lena felt it immediately, that shift, that clarity. She nodded slightly and continued. This time, not with urgency, but with focus. She went back, simplified, clarified, and slowly, the room changed. The tension eased. The director leaned forward, listening, not interrupting. And for the first time, Lena felt in control. And not because she spoke more, but because she spoke with intention. After the meeting, she walked outside. The air felt different, lighter. Daniel joined her a few minutes later. You paused, he said. Lena smiled. I almost didn't, she admitted. Daniel nodded. It's hard, he said, when everything tells you to do the opposite. To speak faster, to react immediately, to fill the silence. Lena looked ahead. Why does silence feel so uncomfortable? She asked. Daniel thought for a moment. Because it reveals things, he said. What kind of things? Lena asked. The truth, he replied. The confusion, the uncertainty, and sometimes ourselves. Lena didn't respond because she understood. In silence, there's nowhere to hide, no words to protect you, no noise to distract you, just what is real. And most people, Daniel continued, don't like that. So they speak, not always to communicate, but to escape. Lena exhaled slowly. She had done that many times, spoken, not because it helped, but because silence felt too honest. And what about you? She asked. Don't you ever feel that? Daniel smiled. I do, he said, but I've learned that silence is not the enemy. It's a tool. Lena looked at him. A tool? Daniel nodded. It gives you time to see clearly, to think, to understand, and most importantly, to choose. Choose what? Lena asked. What matters, he said. What needs to be said, and what doesn't. Lena stood there quietly, letting the words settle, because she realized this wasn't just about meetings or work. It was about life. How often do we react instead of respond? How often do we speak without thinking? How often do we fill space just to avoid feeling it? And what would happen if we didn't? If we allowed silence to exist, not as something to fear, but as something to use. That evening, Lena went home differently, slower, more aware. She noticed small things, the sound of her footsteps, the rhythm of her breathing, the quiet between moments. And for the first time, she didn't try to fill it. She let it be. And because now she understood that quiet is not empty. It is full, full of clarity, full of presence, full of power. And in that quiet, she was no longer trying to be heard. She was learning to truly listen. And maybe that was where real strength begins. There is a moment that doesn't look important. It doesn't feel dramatic. No one raises their voice. No one walks away. And yet, it changes everything. It happened on a quiet Thursday afternoon, not during a meeting, not in a moment of pressure, just in between, the kind of moment people usually ignore. The office was calmer than usual. Most people were focused on their screens. The noise was soft, distant, almost peaceful. Lena was working at her desk, reviewing something for the third time, not because it needed it, but because her mind was restless. Even though things had improved, even though she had learned so much, there was still something inside her. A tension, a quiet question. Am I doing enough? She didn't say it out loud, but it was there, in the background, always. She glanced across the room. Daniel was at his desk, like always, calm, steady, unchanged. And suddenly, she realized something. He never seemed to ask that question, not out of confidence, not out of arrogance, but because he didn't measure himself the same way. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened, a disagreement, not loud, not aggressive, but clear. Two team members, different opinions, different directions, both convinced they were right. The conversation started calmly, but slowly. It became sharper, more defensive, more personal. Lena watched. She could feel it, that familiar shift, the one that turns discussion into conflict. People nearby began to notice. Some looked uncomfortable. Others pretended not to see. And in the middle of it, no one was really listening anymore, just reacting, defending, pushing. Lena felt the urge to step in, to say something, to fix it, but she hesitated because she didn't know how, not without becoming part of the noise. And then Daniel stood up, not quickly, not dramatically, just calmly. He walked over, not into the center, not to take control, just close enough to be present. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't say, stop. Instead, he asked a question, a simple one. What are we trying to achieve? The words were soft, but they landed, not because they were powerful, but because they were honest. The two voices paused, just for a second, but it was enough. Daniel didn't continue. He didn't explain. He didn't take sides. He just waited. And in that silence, something shifted. One of them spoke again, but slower this time, less defensive. We're trying to finish the project, he said. On the other nodded. Without delays, she added. Daniel nodded slightly, still calm, still quiet. And are we doing that right now? He asked. No judgment, no pressure, just a question. And again, silence. But this time, it felt different. Not uncomfortable, not tense, but reflective. Because the answer was clear. No, one of them said quietly. Daniel didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The conversation changed on its own, not instantly, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to move forward. Enough to restore calm. Lena watched the entire moment, and something inside her shifted again, because she realized this was the real power, not in controlling people, not in proving a point, not in winning, but in guiding, gently, quietly, without force. After everything settled, she walked over to Daniel. You didn't fix it, she said. Daniel looked at her. No, he replied. You helped them fix it, she continued. Daniel smiled slightly. That's usually better, he said. Lena shook her head softly. I wouldn't have known what to say, she admitted. And Daniel nodded. That's why you don't start with what to say, he replied. Then what do you start with? Lena asked. Daniel looked toward the two colleagues, now working again, calm, focused. You start with understanding, he said. Not the problem. The people. Lena took a breath, because that was harder. Understanding emotions, egos, fears, not just facts. And once you understand that, Daniel continued, you don't need to control the outcome. You just create space for clarity, for honesty, for people to see for themselves. Lena nodded slowly, because she had seen it, not explained, not taught, but lived. That evening, as she left the office, she felt something different, not just calmer, but clearer, because now she understood that quiet power is not about being silent all the time. It's about knowing when silence serves a purpose, when words matter, and when presence alone is enough. And maybe that's why Daniel never needed to raise his voice, because he never spoke to be heard. He spoke to help others hear themselves. And that is a kind of power most people never learn. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you feel it, you begin to change, quietly, deeply, in ways no one else may notice, but you will. And that is where everything begins. There is a kind of change that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with noise. It doesn't ask for attention. It simply becomes part of you. Weeks passed. Nothing dramatic happened. No big turning point. No moment where everything suddenly made sense. But something was different. Not outside, inside. Lena noticed it in small ways. The way she listened more. The way she paused before speaking. The way she no longer rushed to fill every silence. At first, no one else noticed. And that was okay, because this kind of change was never meant to be seen. It was meant to be felt. One morning, she arrived at work earlier than usual. The office was quiet, almost empty. She sat down, placed her bag beside her chair, and for a moment, she did nothing. No phone, no email, no distractions, just sitting and breathing. It felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable, just different. She looked around, at the empty desks, at the soft morning light, at the stillness, and she realized something. She used to avoid moments like this. She used to fill them immediately, with noise, with movement, with anything, to avoid being alone with her thoughts. But now, she stayed because she understood something she didn't before. Silence is not something to escape, it is something to enter. Later that day, a new situation arose, a mistake, small but noticeable. One of the newer team members had made an error, not serious, but enough to cause stress. Lena saw it happen. She saw the reaction too, the tension, the fear, the quick explanations, the attempt to fix everything immediately. She recognized it, because that used to be her, the need to correct quickly, to speak fast, to protect herself. But this time, she didn't step in immediately. She didn't react. She observed. She waited. And then, she walked over, not to point out the mistake, not to correct, but to understand. "Do you know what happened?" she asked gently. The person nodded, a bit nervous. "Yes, I think I rushed it." Lena nodded. No judgment, no pressure. "What do you think is the best way to fix it?" she asked. There was a pause, a real one, not filled with panic, but with thought. "Well, I could redo this part and check it more carefully." Lena smiled slightly. "That sounds good," she said, and that was it. No lecture, no long explanation, just space and trust. As she walked away, she realized something. This is what Daniel had been doing all along, not giving answers, but creating the conditions for others to find their own. Later that afternoon, she found herself in another meeting. Different people, different topic, but the same patterns. Voices rising, ideas competing, people trying to be right. And again, she felt that familiar moment, that choice, to join the noise or not. She stayed quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because she was listening, carefully, deeply, waiting. And when she finally spoke, it was simple. "I think we're solving two different problems," she said. Silence, heads turned, not because she spoke loudly, but because she spoke clearly. And in that moment, she understood. This is what quiet power feels like. Not control, not force, but clarity, presence, intention. After the meeting, Daniel walked beside her. "You didn't say much," he said. Lena smiled. "I said enough," she replied. Daniel nodded. That's the difference," he said. They walked in silence for a few steps, comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. "You've changed," Daniel added. Lena thought for a moment. "I don't think I've changed," she said slowly. "I think I've stopped trying to be someone else." Daniel looked at her and smiled. That quiet smile, the kind that says more than words. That evening, as Lena sat by her window at home, she thought about everything, not in a rushed way, not trying to analyze, just remembering the moments, the pauses, the silence. And she realized something important. Strength is not always visible. It doesn't always speak loudly. It doesn't demand attention. Sometimes it sits quietly, observing, understanding, waiting. And when it finally speaks, it changes everything, not because it is loud, but because it is true. And maybe that is why some people don't need to raise their voice, because they have learned something deeper, something rare, something most people overlook. That real power doesn't come from being heard by everyone. It comes from knowing when to speak, why to speak, and when silence is the most powerful response of all. So if you are listening to this and you feel like you are not loud enough, not confident enough, not strong enough, maybe you don't need to become louder. Maybe you just need to become clearer, more present, more intentional, because quiet is not weakness. It never was. It is something else entirely, something steady, something grounded, something powerful, in a way the world doesn't always recognize. But those who understand it will always feel it. And they will listen, not because they have to, but because they want to, because something in your presence feels real. And in a world full of noise, that is rare. And rare is powerful. Thank you for listening. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, then something has already changed. And maybe that quiet change is the beginning of something deeper. Stay calm, stay present, and trust that your quiet has its own voice. You just have to learn how to use it.